Good evening, and welcome to episode 9 of Sword of the Spirit. I want to backtrack a little bit to last week's episode and just clarify a couple of little points. Now, when we spoke of Ishmael, and we spoke of the inheritance and him being Abraham's first son, we have to be clear that while the biblical structure is that the head of the household, the man is the head of the household, and the patriarch, etc., however, and the inheritance and birthright comes through that. However, it's important to know that the bloodline is traced through the mother. So even though Ishmael was born, he was born of his mother Hagar, the bondwoman. Hagar means sojourner, by the way, woman who sojourns or travels. And so Ishmael did not have the claim, a legitimate claim to the birthright. He had a legitimate claim as his father's son, but not because he was not the son of promise through Sarah, as God had told him Isaac would be born. So it's through Sarah that the bloodline continues, while the birthright inheritance and the family tradition goes through with the father. So I wanted to make sure that we understood that and see that the difference here between Ishmael and his nephew Esau is that Ishmael didn't have a choice. He didn't have valid claim. Esau did. And what did he do? He was hungry. Took care of his fleshly needs. Wasn't interested. Did not really care about what the inheritance, the birthright, requires. It requires the honorable maintenance and continuation of the father's legacy in the tribe and the growth and et cetera, et cetera. And I told you they were both very wealthy when they left, but Esau was a guy that said, nah, I'm hungry. Give me some beans. So he had the beans. He had the choice. He took the beans. He could have the birthright. So, again, when we go back and look at Jacob's real name, yes, it means a supplanter, all right, one who grabs by the heel, but it also means one who restrains and keeps from something else happening that could be calamitous, which it was going to be. Remember, Esau was a wild man. Married Canaanite women. Not only did he not have any particular affinity for his father's kingdom, but he didn't have anything in terms of any kind of understanding of his father's God. So he went his way. Anyway, it's important to understand that. But so we have that at least established, and that struggle continues to this day as we went through last week. So that being said, we are going to repeat things a little bit, but I want to go, before we go on with the rest of the first half of this message, to go and to explain to you the process. If I were to speak singularly about any of these three topics, or four ultimately, Antichrist spirit, Jezebel spirit, the system or the history of it all, Revelation, if I all just did that end to end, we'd be talking about it and we'd exhaust all that information, but then we'd have to go retrain our mind to get into a new system and thinking about Jezebel. I want to be able to speak about all of these and go back in the lineage, etc., and flow forward. But you're going to see some real characters were related to these guys, right up to Adolf Hitler and beyond, right through the bloodline. So I want to be able to go and speak about any one of these three or four areas as we need to, because it'll create a bigger picture and how they relate. And then when we get into Revelation next week, we're going to talk about, a lot of things that are going on now and how it all relates to those, to the book of Revelation. We're going to start out with Revelation 1, 2, 3, talk about the churches, etc. But tonight, I want to go, before we do that, I want to just reiterate a couple of things that had to do with this lineage. And we mentioned in Matthew last week that certain of the generations were omitted because in reality, the three that were omitted, the three kings, were directly related to Jezebel and obviously to Athaliah. Now, we see this, and we want to mention this about the inheritance and the bloodline, and the problems with Jezebel, because that spirit, okay, regardless of who it manifests in or through, or what country it manifests in or through, or what religion it manifests in or through, it doesn't matter. Its purpose is, and we can see it today in everything in society, it's the age-old, and this is why it's so amazing to me that people don't see it. It's hiding in plain sight. It's the age-old divide and conquer. You can't get any older strategy than that, okay? Tell a bunch of lies, divide, conquer, control, and ultimately destroy. In this case, the spirit needs to destroy anything in its wake, but particularly the bloodline to the Messiah. It tried real hard to do it the first time, and it's still trying today, all right? It's still trying today. That's a spirit of anti-Semitism, by the way, because if you think about it, Antichrist means anti-Messiah, right? All right. What's Christ? Christos, the anointed one, right? Yeshua means our salvation, the anointed salvation. God is our anointed salvation, okay? So anything that is anti or anti that Messiah is inherently anti-Semitic. Get it? A lot of people don't, including a wide range of people that call themselves believers today in the church, so-called church, body of the Messiah. Imagine that. Body of Messiah don't believe in the Messiah. They don't believe in what they want to believe. Well, time for that to change. So anyway, we get back to that little genealogy, and I'll go over it again. The association that those three kings that were omitted was Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah, had to do with being related to Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom, and his relationship, and there's obviously with Jezebel, Ahab's wife, who promoted the Baal worship and persecuted and killed the prophets of Jehovah. And, our guy killed them back. And really, because of her evil acts, Elijah actually placed a curse on the house of Ahab, as I think we mentioned last week. And obviously stands. But we know as well from 2 Kings 8, 18 and 2 Chronicles 21:6 that there was an alliance that Joram, Jehoshaphat's son, and Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, all right, had children. All right, Athaliah had a son whose name was Ahaziah, and we can see that next two lineages down in Matthew are eliminated because of that relationship. But we do know that as Athaliah was, so was Jezebel, a great-grandmother in Yeshua, the Messiah's bloodline itself. Okay, and isn't it funny? We talked about Athaliah, who was a real wicked. I mean, she was a witch. She killed everybody. She killed her whole family, all the children except the one we talked about. Joash was the one she didn't get. Okay, because his aunt saved him. And when she found out, and he claimed to be king, whew, boy, oh boy, Athaliah went nuts. She didn't know the kid was alive, and now he's being named the king, and she can't do nothing about it. She's the reigning queen with no king. Okay? Totally out of order. But she didn't kill her son. Isn't it funny what her son Joash's name means? Jehovah has become a man. I find that not only ironic, but whew, imagine that. Jehovah has become a man. Pointing directly to Yeshua, the Messiah, the birth. Imagine that. Scripture is really perfect when you really dig in and take a look at it. But anyway, let's go back, and we're going to, as I said, we're going to go back and forth here and there, and talk about some things we mentioned about how this estate was. And I also wanted to really mention about why this whole bloodline thing is tied to the Christ or anti-Messiah or anti-salvation, basically anti-God salvation, okay, is so important. Because anything that exalts itself in the place of God and Messiah, okay, is automatically idolatrous, and it's automatically, anti-God. But, as I said, when if you're anti-Messiah, you're also anti-Semitic by design. The whole concept of the Messiah is entirely through the Jewish people, through the people of Israel. So the intention of divide, conquer, isolate, and destroy is to destroy everything and anything that God has deemed as good. Anything that has to do with God and His chosen, His Messiah, is the ultimate point of destruction for these spirits, and particularly that of Jezebel. Okay? When you search the bloodlines, you'll see that there are many stories in Scripture. In the book of Esther, okay? She does the unthinkable. She presents herself to the king and saves her people Israel from Haman, who wanted to destroy the Jewish people. It turns out that Haman wound up being hung. We also know that Haman's bloodline traces back right back to Esau. So does Herod's, by the way. Because Esau's kingdom is Edom and the Edomites, among others, but predominantly the Edomites. And from the Edomites come the Idumeans, and Herod was an Idumean. What did he do? When he heard about this child, he put out an edict to kill them all. Every child 2 years and under. Take them out. You don't think there is a pattern to what's going on? I think it's very clear. It's very, very clear. And when we find out a little later down the pike a little bit about where Esau settled and who Esau represents today, that's going to be some more of an eye-opener. All right. So now, before we do that, now we're going to take another little tack. We're going to go back yet in time. We talked about Ishmael, all right, Abraham's first son through Hagar. We just mentioned it a few moments ago. And we know from our study that there are the 12 tribes of Israel that come from Jacob, right? Okay. So Ishmael, Jacob's uncle, and this is, I wouldn't say widely known, it's no secret, but it's just not widely addressed, okay? But there's also 12 tribes of Ishmael. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it is. We're very familiar with the story of Abraham and his son, and we talked about Hagar and Ishmael and the firstborn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? And we read here, right, in Genesis 17:20, it says, "But as for Ishmael, I have heard thee." That's what Ishmael means, by the way. God has heard. "Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation." It's important to understand, again, that there are always areas of perceived counterfeit, in that there are 12 tribes of Ishmael, and God said he's going to bless them in a certain way. All right, there are 12 tribes of Jacob. God said those are his chosen. He's going to bless them in a certain way. but it didn't always work the way God had intended because of man's choices. But I just want to go ahead and continue to give you a little bit more about our buddy Ishmael here and his reach. In Genesis 25, verses 12 through 16, it says, "Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bore unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Abdil, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadad, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their nations." Okay? Now, where were those nations? Essentially, in southern Jordan, in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, in that neck of the woods. And there were tribes that moved around. They're Bedouin type. And as I said before, there really were no borders. So they really just extended and expanded out. All right. And that's exactly what they did. And we don't know a whole lot about all of them, but we do have some records. And one of the important ones is Nebajoth, okay? He's mentioned by Josephus, the Jewish historian who we've talked about before, and Ishmael's eldest son. They were known as sheep herders. In Isaiah 60, verse 7, it says that, but they're mentioned frequently in the record of the Assyrians, all right, in the Nabatean or the Nabatean area of the Arabian nations. That's in the Jewish Antiquities of Josephus, item I-22-1. And he wrote during the time of the Nabateans were in existence, supposedly, so he had this information directly from the Nabateans themselves. They were Assyrians, essentially, and Arabians. In 703 BC, they and the Chaldeans had a little war against Sennacherib and the Assyrian rulers. And these people, the ancient records of Tilgath-Pileser III, who is mentioned in the Bible more than once, was one of the rebels and a descendant of Hagar, who is Ishmael's mother. So you see how these tribes move and they grow and they assimilate and they go to war. The Assyrian kingdom eventually broke into the two as two brothers began to rule, one Babylonia and one Assyria, and these were both two kingdoms that conquered Israel. So they're noteworthy to mention them as well. And it's pretty clear from the records that I said in 586 BC that the Edomites began a gradual migration north into the Jewish lands that had been emptied or vacated by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The tribes of Arabia, they all began to move northward, okay, toward the city of what we now call Aqaba, all right? A very short move inland for the Nabatu to occupy that land, the land of the Edomites. All right, and that became basically Edom. Some of those Edomites remained behind, and then those that emigrated to Judea, as I said, became Idumeans like King Herod. All right, and the point being here that these different groups stemming from Ishmael, all right, and then from Esau, were out to kill and get rid of all of Israel. That was the plan. It's still the plan. Then we go his son Kedar, all right? They were called Kedarites. They were the military power of all the sons of Ishmael, okay? His gifted archers are spoken of in Isaiah 21, verses 16 through 17, and Ezekiel 27:21. He basically suggests that there was a confederation of these tribes under the Kedarite leadership. All right. And what they did, they were in constant conflict with the Assyrians, their own brothers. So, not only was this a birthright feud, but it was interfamily, internecine warfare within the families themselves, because what they were really trying to do was basically take control of the commercial trade routes in northern Arabia. All right, the Romans recognized how important that was, and what is it today? Well, you can take a look at what China's trying to reestablish in that direction. That's the Silk Road, and they're making it an international Silk Road. Okay, so what kind of religion do these people have? Well, the Assyrians, and we have inscriptions of Sennacherib, had several different Arabian deities in the city of Duma. One was called Atarsamane, the morning star of heaven. All right, the counterpart of the Mesopotamian Ishtar. All right, and queen priestesses, and we have this sky goddess, also known as Alat. Herodotus 3:3 gives us an understanding, and there are more than one. All right, but I will give you this one that has been pretty well researched out, that Alat, okay, was later masculinized in the form of Allah, and that's pretty well documented in the pantheon of gods in the Kedarite hierarchy. And it says Herodotus in the 5th century BC identified two deities that were worshipped among the Arabs as a fertility god called Oratalt, perhaps Ruda, as identified by MacDonald in northern Arabia in the first millennium, BC 1360, and, I quote, a sky goddess known as Alat, later to be masculine in the masculinized form of Allah. So you see, there's much mention of these things throughout Scripture. We go to one of his other sons, Duma, mentioned in the biblical records as the city of Canaan in Joshua 15:52, one of the actual names that was deciphered in our opening comments to this study, as well as in episode 1. It's also associated with Edom and Seir in Isaiah 21:11. So you can see that these kingdoms are now all about this, and now all about the money too. Major trade routes from a geographical standpoint. Adamatu, associated with the medieval Arabic Dumat, in ancient times, a very strategic junction on the major trade route between Syria and Babylon and those areas. These places are still coveted for their location, their wealth. Nothing has changed. It's the entrance to northern Arabia that we're talking about here. That's where most of the oil sits. Okay? So, in getting just through that, I just wanted to give you a little idea about some of the things that are going on here, and what they really mean to us today in our study. Now we're going to go back a little bit more. We're going to go over to 2 Chronicles 19 through 23. And I'm not going to read all of that. I'm just going to allude to you some of the things that we're talking about, where we have these Edomites. And we prove once again in Scripture that they are in fact descendants of Esau. Because again, it all goes back to the birthright. Okay? And we know this. There are a few places that we might want to talk about a little bit. We see in chapter 21, Jehoram married the daughter of King Ahab and Jezebel, the Athaliah that we talked about. And, even then, there was so much politics going on. Jehoshaphat's father made a treaty with the king of another disastrous treaty with, the king of Aram. He makes this treaty, and then one with Ahab, with Jezebel with him, and then more and more another treaty with King Ahaziah, which resulted in all the shipwrecks. I mean, this guy Jehoshaphat made some really poor choices, but he did have a heart for God, and he did what was right in God's eyes in chapter 20, verse 31 of 2 Chronicles. However, it said he did not remove all the high places, and the people still had not set their hearts on the God of their fathers in chapter 20, verse 33. So even in trying to do the right thing, the overcoming and the overwhelming power of this spirit, all right, still had this guy scared to do what he needed to do. But he said he didn't remove the high places. He didn't remove the groves, the worship groves of the goddess and the idols that they worship. Okay, so we have here a really kind of a reckless situation in that we see infighting, murder, injustice. The whole ball of wax here comes together in family struggles that are basically just destructive, trying to kill everything and everyone in sight. All right, and the Edomites are also mentioned, in Numbers 20:14, that they were right on the edge of the promised land in Kadesh Barnea, okay, and wanted to pass through the land. And the Edomites said no, they wouldn't let the Israelites pass through. And again, these are all relatives. These people are all related. So this family battle is just continuing to go on and on and on and on. All right. So we see these basically invincible armies killing each other off. All right. Judah finally returns back with and rejoices over the defeat of their enemies, back and forth with these Edomite descendants of Esau. Okay, it's just been a constant struggle, and it goes on to this day, to this very day. I saw a show a number of years ago, maybe, I don't know, 1990, where a very polished young Israeli political figure, dressed well in a suit, multicultural, multilingual, all that stuff, and an older Arab professor, and they both were in the land, and they were going to discuss amicably about the indications of the right to the land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it started out, and for about maybe, 2.5, 3 minutes, it was really great. Before they both started screaming and yelling at each other, you don't have any right to this land, and who told you, and Jacob, and this and that, and who was promised? They didn't care. They were at each other's throats. It had gone from the sublime to the ridiculous in like 3 minutes. Well, you know what? I heard just last week that the United Nations decided to get up and say that Israel had no claim to the Temple Mount. Well, who did? There was no such thing as Palestinians back then, so who had claim to that mountain? There was no such thing as Islam back then, so who had claim to that Temple Mount? All right, that's agreed by both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, by the way, that is the site that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, the child of promise, not Ishmael, Isaac. Ishmael ultimately became, as we're going to show in Esau, and the Edomites migrated and became a very large religion that we'll talk about. But they said Israel has no claim there. Now, as far as I can remember, that's about 4,000, maybe 5,000 years ago. But they say that this other religion, who was established in the year 632 AD, has the right to that. We can see where this is going, okay? Esau wants that birthright back. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. All right, we're going to get ready for a little break. Then we're going to keep moving on. And we may get into that bit about Revelation a little bit tonight. So be blessed. Let's take this little break, and we'll be back in a minute.